Thomas Briggs stood outside the old church on Main Street as wedding guests arrived under the marquee. He was 65, wearing a worn navy blazer and slacks, holding a letter and a family photo album. He looked at the entrance, remembering years of Sunday school lessons he had taught, PTA meetings, and graduations he had attended. Now he waited in silence outside the fence. A background voice inside called for father of the bride to come forward. Thomas took a step forward. A young staff member approached and said, "I am sorry, sir, but you are not permitted inside." Thomas replied softly, "I am the father of the bride." The staff member frowned and followed instructions. Without raising his voice, Thomas said, "I came to leave a gift," and then stepped back. Inside the church, the officiant said again, "May we invite the father of the bride?" And Thomas heard gasps. He walked to the gate calmly. Eliza emerged from the corridor, saw her father, her face unreadable. She turned her back and said, "Take him away." Security moved in quickly. As Thomas raised one hand in quiet resignation, the crowd inside fell silent. Then the mayor stood. He was once Thomas S.'s student. He rose from his seat, lifted his voice, and said, "That man raised me, and you will not treat him that way. Not in front of me, not in front of this whole town." He walked through the chapel doors and reached Thomas. He took Thomas S.'s arm and said, "Let him in." The hush turned to whispers, then applause spread through the guests. Eliza froze. Color drained from her face. Several guests turned toward her. The mayor escorted Thomas into the aisle. Guests stepped aside. Thomas walked slowly between them, each step heavy with memory but also with dignity. The crowd parted, and Thomas paused near the altar. The mayor nodded to an usher who handed Thomas the microphone. The room felt charged. That was the opening moment. That was the moment everything changed for Thomas. Thomas Briggs was never a man of great wealth, but he was a man of consistency, honor, and depth. For over 3 decades, he taught literature and history at the same high school in a small town tucked between 2 rivers in upstate New York. He wore the same tweed jackets year after year, wrote lesson plans by hand, and remembered every student's name even decades after they graduated. He was the kind of teacher students came back to visit not because they needed a reference, but because they remembered how he made them feel, valued, capable, seen. His reputation in the community was quiet but strong. People described him with words like reliable, principled, and kind. He was the kind of man who fixed neighbors' mailboxes without being asked and shoveled the elderly widow's driveway before dawn. But Thomas had never been loud about who he was. He believed in letting time tell the truth. His life was a steady rhythm of commitment, especially to his family. He met his wife Marie when he was 24. She was a librarian, with a laugh like wind chimes and a heart as wide as a county fair. Together, they built a small, warm home and raised 2 children, Eliza and Cody. Marie passed away from cancer when Eliza was 20 and Cody was 16. Her absence carved a quiet grief into Thomas's life, but he carried on shouldering the role of both mother and father. He never remarried. Every morning, he made breakfast, packed lunches, and left encouraging notes in their backpacks. Every night, he waited up until they were home. He sat front row at school concerts, science fairs, and award nights. He scraped together enough savings to send Eliza to a prestigious private college. He worked summers at the hardware store to cover Cody's braces. But as the years passed and his children grew into adulthood, Thomas began to sense something shifting. Cody remained close, calling weekly, visiting when he could, but Eliza began to pull away. At first it was subtle missed phone calls, shorter conversations, canceled visits. She moved to a large city, climbed fast in the corporate PR world, and began dating a man from a wealthy family. When Thomas visited once, she asked him not to wear his old jacket to dinner. She said it didn't fit the vibe of the restaurant. That was the first time he felt like an embarrassment. He laughed it off at the time. Over the next few years, their relationship grew more distant. Eliza rarely came home. When she did, it was for brief weekends, and she stayed at a hotel. She insisted it was for space, But Thomas understood. He didn't say anything. He didn't want to push her away further. Then came the moment that broke something quietly in him. Thomas found out about Eliza's engagement from a former colleague at school whose daughter had seen it on Instagram. No phone call, no message, nothing. At first he told himself she was just busy. Maybe she was planning a surprise. Maybe there was a card in the mail. But the days turned into weeks. Eventually he called Cody. The conversation was short. Cody was hesitant, uncomfortable. "She's keeping it small," he said. "It's kind of complicated, Dad." Thomas asked one question. "Am I invited?" Cody was silent for a long moment, then finally said, "I don't think she wants that." That night Thomas sat at his kitchen table looking at the worn photo of Marie he kept by the window. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just stared. Not at the past, but at what it meant that everything he had given was not enough to be included in a moment he thought he had earned the right to witness. But he didn't let bitterness take root. He simply opened a drawer, pulled out an old leather-bound album, and began selecting photos. Birthday cakes, first days of school, Eliza's high school graduation. He wrote a short letter and tucked it inside the front cover. Then he set his alarm for the wedding day. He would go. Not to interrupt, not to demand a place, but to leave something behind. To show silently that he was there, that he had always been there. On the morning of Eliza's wedding, Thomas rose early. He showered, shaved carefully, and put on his best shirt, the pale blue one Marie had always liked. He pressed his slacks the night before and polished his shoes until they shined faintly in the dim light of his small kitchen. He ran a comb through his thinning gray hair and looked at himself in the mirror. For a moment, he didn't see an old man. He saw a father proud and quiet, carrying years of love in the lines of his face. He wrapped the photo album in plain brown paper, tied it with a single strand of blue ribbon, and slid the letter inside. He didn't write anything dramatic, just a note that said, "I'm proud of you. I always have been. With love, Dad." Then he left his house and began the drive to the church. It was a crisp morning, the kind of morning Marie used to call wedding weather. The sun was soft and golden, the air fresh with the scent of spring. Thomas parked across the street from the church and sat in his car for a moment watching as guests arrived. Women in bright dresses, men in tailored suits, laughter echoing across the lot. He waited until most had gone inside before getting out. He walked slowly, deliberately. No rush, no spectacle, just presence. He reached the front steps and stood off to the side. From where he stood, he could see through the tall glass doors into the vestibule, where ushers were seating guests, and the string quartet played softly. He didn't intend to go in. He just wanted to see her Eliza in her dress, to witness, if only for a moment, the culmination of all those childhood dreams she had once whispered in the back seat during long drives home from ballet practice. A young man in a black shirt and earpiece approached him. "Can I help you, sir?" Thomas nodded gently. "I'm Eliza's father." The man hesitated, checking his list. "I'm sorry. I don't see you on the guest list." The bride's instructions were very clear. Thomas nodded again. "I understand. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just came to drop this off." He held out the wrapped album. The staff member didn't take it. He looked uncertain. Then, as if on cue, another voice echoed from inside. "Can we please have the father of the bride come forward?" The words hung in the air. A pause followed. Guests turned in their seats. Thomas stepped forward slightly instinctively. That was when Eliza appeared. She stood framed by the doorway in her white dress, radiant and composed. Her eyes locked on her father. For a brief second, something flickered: recognition, discomfort, maybe even guilt. Then her expression hardened. She turned to the staff and said loudly enough for others to hear, "He's not part of this. Please, ask him to leave." Thomas's face didn't change. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at her and nodded. "Of course," he said, voice low and even. "I only wanted to wish you well." He turned slowly, preparing to walk away, the album still in his hands. The staff member placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sir, I'll need to escort you off the premises." Thomas raised a hand gently. "No need. I'm going." Guests inside murmured. A few had risen. A couple by the window looked on with furrowed brows. Thomas had only taken 2 steps back when another voice, deeper and firmer, rang out from the center of the church. "That's enough." It was the mayor. He stood tall in his tailored suit, hands at his sides, face set with quiet fury. He looked directly at Eliza and said, "You may have the right to choose your guest list, but I have the right to choose whether I stay and watch this." The room fell silent. "That man," he continued, pointing toward Thomas, "is the reason I graduated high school. When my father left and I nearly dropped out, he stayed after class with me every day. He bought me dinner the night of my final exam. He showed me what a man should be. He showed me what dignity looks like." Eliza tried to speak, but the mayor held up a hand. "You call him an embarrassment? I call him the backbone of this town." Guests stirred, heads turned. Someone began to clap. A second later, others followed. Thomas stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. He hadn't come for this. He hadn't asked for it. The mayor walked to the entrance, took the album from Thomas's hands, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come in," he said simply. And Thomas, still stunned, allowed himself to be led inside. As the mayor guided Thomas down the aisle, the crowd parted with a hushed reverence, as though something sacred was happening. Guests stood, not out of protocol, but out of respect. Thomas moved with slow steps, his eyes focused not on anyone in particular, but on the floor ahead of him, as though grounding himself with each pace. The air in the room felt charged, tense, but reverent. When they reached the front, the mayor took the microphone from the stand and turned to face the audience. "I was not planning to speak today," he began. "But sometimes silence becomes complicity." He gestured to Thomas. "This man taught me to read beyond the lines, to question injustice, and to believe in my own worth when no one else did. I wouldn't be standing here as your elected mayor if not for the lessons he poured into me without ever asking for anything in return." A murmur rippled through the pews. Thomas looked over at Eliza, who now sat rigid, her groom whispering something beside her. She did not respond. "You may think he doesn't fit this room," the mayor continued, "but if this room has any honor left in it, it should rise to match his presence, not diminish him for it." A small cluster of older guests began to clap again. This time it wasn't awkward. It was intentional. One by one the crowd joined in. Some stood, some nodded. Even a few members of the groom's family looked quietly moved, unsure how to respond, but clearly affected. Thomas stood still, blinking slowly. The mayor leaned toward him. "Say something," he whispered. Thomas took the microphone, hesitant at first, then firmer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't command the room. But every word landed like a stone in a quiet lake. "I didn't come here today to make a scene," he said. "I came because I wanted to leave something behind for my daughter, a reminder of where she came from and who loved her first." His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't pause. "I won't pretend I understand everything that led to this moment. Maybe I failed in ways I don't even realize. But I never stopped showing up. I was always there. That was my job. That was my love." He looked toward Eliza. "I didn't raise you to repay me. I raised you to stand on your own. And you've done that." He handed the microphone back. The silence that followed was deep and full. No one spoke. No one moved. Eventually, the officiant cleared his throat and gently resumed the ceremony as though afraid to disrupt the solemnity that lingered. Thomas turned to leave quietly, but the mayor caught his arm again. "Stay," he said. "You belong here more than anyone." Thomas didn't sit in the front row. He chose a spot along the side wall near the exit. From there, he watched the rest of the ceremony unfold not with bitterness, but with a weary kind of peace. He had said his piece. He had been seen, and that was enough. The video of the wedding confrontation began circulating online the very next day. A guest had captured the moment the mayor stood the applause, Thomas's speech, and Eliza's stunned silence. It was uploaded with the caption, "When the bride's father was banned, but the whole town remembered him." Within hours, it spread across local Facebook groups, then Twitter, then national forums. By the end of the week, it had been viewed over 3 million times. Comment sections filled with stories. From strangers sharing their own family estrangements, their own quiet heroes. Former students of Thomas began posting under the hashtag #ThankYou Mr. Briggs. Some shared old yearbook photos. Others shared moments he had changed their lives, helping them pass a final writing, a college recommendation, lending them lunch money. Local news stations requested interviews. National outlets reached out. Thomas declined them all. He stayed in his modest home, tending his small garden, visiting the library, and continuing to tutor neighborhood kids who struggled with reading. He never once posted a response, but the world around him shifted. Former colleagues stopped by with casseroles. The high school dedicated a bench in his name beneath the old oak tree in the courtyard. The mayor proposed a community literacy initiative and named it after Thomas. A muralist began painting his likeness on the side of the old gymnasium, next to the quote, "Show up. That's your love." Even those who hadn't known Thomas before the video now treated him like a landmark of dignity. Meanwhile, Eliza's PR firm issued a bland statement about respecting personal family privacy. But the backlash didn't go away. Clients quietly distanced themselves. Her company reassigned her to internal accounts. The groom's parents, both prominent in their own business circles, expressed discomfort privately. None of it was catastrophic. Eliza wasn't canceled, but the shine dulled. The narrative changed. And everywhere she went, she knew eyes lingered a little longer. She called her brother Cody one evening in tears. "I didn't mean for it to go like this," she said. "I just wanted to have a clean moment." Cody didn't respond right away. Then he said, "You got one, but not the one you planned." Cody visited Thomas later that week. They sat on the porch drinking iced tea. Cody brought photos from his own family, his wife, his 2 daughters. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner," he said. "I was afraid I'd make it worse." Thomas shook his head. "You did what you could. It's not your burden." Cody looked at him. "But it's yours, and it shouldn't have been." Thomas didn't argue. He didn't need to. They sat in the golden light of late afternoon, the silence between them, not heavy, just full. Then Cody said, "You should know something. The superintendent wants to honor you at the spring graduation. They're giving you a Community Legacy Award." Thomas raised his eyebrows, but said nothing. Later that night, he opened a package left at his door. It was the photo album he had wrapped for Eliza's wedding, unopened, returned with no note. He stared at it for a long time before placing it back in the drawer where it had always lived. In the weeks that followed, Thomas's life didn't become louder or more complicated. If anything, it became quieter, but not in a hollow way. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed, and the sky doesn't just clear, it softens. He resumed his routine, waking early, watering his garden, walking to the library by 9. But something had shifted. People who used to pass him without notice now paused to say good morning. The librarian offered him coffee with a smile, and the janitor at the high school gave him a nod that said, more than words ever could. The world hadn't given him a medal. It had given him something better: recognition without performance, respect without demand. Still, he remained private about the experience. When asked, he simply said, "I'm just grateful to be remembered kindly." He never mentioned Eliza. He didn't have to. The town knew, the internet knew, and most of all, he knew. The wound was there, yes, but it had scabbed. It no longer bled. One Saturday morning, Thomas was invited to speak at a community youth program. It wasn't a big event, just a group of local teenagers, a couple of folding tables, and free donuts. He almost declined, but something told him to go. He wore his old corduroy jacket and brought a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. When he stood in front of the room, he didn't talk about the wedding, the video, or even the mayor. Instead, he talked about dignity. Dignity, he said, isn't about being proud. It's about not shrinking. It's about standing your ground even when nobody claps, even when someone else takes your seat. It's about not turning cruel just because someone else was. The kids listened. Some looked away. A few stared hard. When he finished, a girl in the front row raised her hand and said, "Were you ever really angry?" Thomas smiled. "I was," he said. "But not for long. Anger is a fire that burns the person holding the torch." Later that afternoon, while cleaning his porch, Thomas found a small envelope wedged into the mailbox, no return address. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery and a short note written in a neat, familiar hand. "I'm sorry I returned the album. I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't ready to see myself through your eyes. Maybe I'll be ready someday. Eliza." Thomas didn't cry. He didn't write back. He just placed the note in the back of the album, tucked it in a drawer, and exhaled slowly. Forgiveness, he realized, didn't need a ceremony. It only needed space. In the months that followed, he kept teaching kids who couldn't read well. He helped an elderly neighbor fix her porch. He donated half his pension check to the town's scholarship fund. No cameras, no hashtags, just living. The quiet triumph of knowing he had never stopped being who he said he was. Spring arrived with gentle breezes and longer light. The trees lining the main street bloomed in soft pinks and whites, and the town slowly emerged from its winter hush. One morning, Thomas received an official letter from the school district inviting him to speak at the high school graduation. It was the same stage he had stood on dozens of times over the years, handing out diplomas, clapping for students, offering quiet advice behind the curtain. This time they wanted him at the podium. He considered declining, but something inside him, calm, steady, not prideful, told him to go. On the day of the ceremony, he wore his favorite shirt and a clean jacket. As he walked toward the school auditorium, a group of students and teachers stood out front, greeting him with quiet nods and warm smiles. Inside, the audience was full. Parents, grandparents, teachers, and hundreds of graduates sat shoulder to shoulder. The air buzzed with the energy of anticipation. Thomas was introduced not just as a former teacher, but as a pillar of character in this town. When he stepped onto the stage, the room quieted. He stood for a moment looking out at the crowd. Then he began. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought legacy meant achievement, degrees, trophies, recognition. But the longer I've lived, the more I've learned that legacy isn't about what follows your name. It's about what echoes in the lives you've touched. And you don't always see those echoes right away. Sometimes you never do." He paused, letting the stillness settle. "You'll be tempted to measure your worth by what others say about you. Don't. Measure it by what you still stand for when no one claps. Measure it by how you treat the ones who forget you, by how you carry yourself when it hurts." He didn't mention Eliza. He didn't mention the video. But everyone felt the presence of that story, woven into his words like thread in a quilt. He continued, "There will be moments in your life when someone will try to reduce you, when they'll call you old-fashioned or embarrassing or out of place. But if you've lived with integrity, you never are. Because dignity is louder than shame, and consistency is stronger than rejection." The room was silent. Some parents wiped their eyes. Several students sat upright, no longer slouching. When he finished, there was no eruption of applause. Instead, the entire room rose to their feet, not in excitement, but in reverence. A standing ovation that felt earned, not automatic. After the ceremony, dozens of students lined up to shake his hand. One young girl hugged him and whispered, "I want to be someone like you." Later that evening, Thomas returned home and found another letter in the mail. This one was from Eliza again. Longer, thoughtful, honest. In it, she wrote about the image she had built for herself, how tightly she had clung to it, and how afraid she had been to let her past show through it. I didn't know how to reconcile the man who gave me everything with the world that expected me to pretend he didn't exist, she wrote. I thought I had to choose. I see now I didn't. She asked nothing. She offered no grand promises, just an opening. Just the start of something softer. Thomas folded the letter, placed it in the same drawer with the first one, and smiled. A week later, he received an invitation to speak at a state education conference. The keynote speaker that year would be the mayor, and the theme was Leading Through Presence. The mayor had only one request that Thomas close the event. When asked if he felt proud, Thomas said only this: I feel grateful, and maybe a little surprised that being yourself can go so far. On the day of the conference, as he waited backstage, he reached into his jacket pocket and touched the edge of Eliza's second letter. It was his reminder not of pain, but of process. That healing was not always about return, but about release. And that in letting go of the need to be validated, he had finally been seen. As he stepped onto the stage to speak to hundreds of educators, officials, and leaders, he didn't feel nervous. He felt steady, whole. And when he began to speak, his voice was clear, not loud, but clear. And the first words he said were these: sometimes the storm doesn't pass. Sometimes you just learn how to walk through it without letting go of your name. Months passed, and the story of Thomas Briggs faded from the headlines, but remained etched in the quiet corners of memory across the town. The mural on the high school gym was completed, and students often posed for photos beside it, unaware that the man in the painting still walked past their school every morning. The literacy fund named in his honor reached its goal, and 5 students received full scholarships that fall. Thomas didn't attend the award ceremony. He preferred to remain behind the curtain like he always had. But he did write a letter to each recipient, handwritten and sealed in a simple envelope. You don't need to be perfect, he wrote in one. You just need to show up again tomorrow. One evening in late October, as the air turned sharp and leaves collected along the sidewalks, Thomas received a phone call. It was Eliza. She asked if she could come for dinner. Not a long visit, just a meal. He said yes. He made her favorite chicken pot pie with peas and fresh thyme, a recipe Marie had perfected years before. When Eliza arrived, she looked older than he remembered. Not in a tired way, but in a lived-in way. She brought a bottle of wine and a photo of her and Thomas from when she was 10, both of them grinning beside a science fair volcano. They ate in near silence at first, the clink of cutlery filling the gaps where old tension once lived. Eventually she spoke. I'm sorry it took me this long, she said. I didn't know how to fix it, Thomas replied. It was never about fixing, just about seeing. They talked for 2 hours, about her job, about Cody's girls, about Marie. Not everything was solved. Not everything needed to be. Before she left, Eliza handed him a wrapped gift. It was the photo album, the one he had made for her wedding. This time opened its pages, creased and studied. Tucked inside was a new letter, dated just days before. Thank you for not vanishing when I tried to erase you, it said. You taught me love with your silence more than I ever learned from anyone else's applause. After she left, Thomas stood by the window and looked out at the quiet street. He didn't cry. He didn't even smile. He just stood there, one hand resting on the album, the other tucked in his pocket, the weight of memory both grounding and lifting him. Later that night, he took a clean sheet of paper and began to write, not for Eliza, not for the world, but for himself. A note to be found someday. He wrote, I wasn't always seen, but I was always there. And being there, even when forgotten, even when dismissed, that was my calling. That was my strength. If you're reading this, know that your presence matters even when no one applauds. Keep showing up. That's how you become unforgettable. He folded the paper, slipped it into the back of the album, and turned off the light. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, peace settled like dust on the windowsill. And for the first time in years, Thomas Briggs slept through the night without waking once.